Hello, everyone, and welcome to Georgia at the Crossroads special event by Coda Story and our partners, ZegFest, Stranger's Guide magazine, and Radio Tavisupleba. I'm Natalia Antelava. I'm Coda's editor-in-chief and your host tonight, or today, depending on where you are. Coda is a nonprofit newsroom that covers the root causes of global crises. And what's happening in Georgia today, and just to clarify, we are talking about Georgia, the country, not the state. What's happening there today is truly a crisis of massive proportions and one that will have consequences far beyond the country's borders. I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us today. Really grateful to you for tuning in. And quick housekeeping, please keep an eye on the chat. We will be filling it with links, but also feel free to jump in, comment, ask a question. We will try to get to as many questions as we can today. I have a quick confession to make. As a Georgian myself, although I'm outside of the country at the moment, I thought I have seen it all. I've covered protests, the revolution, I remember the Civil War, but what's happening today really is unprecedented. We have amazing speakers today to explain the latest and, most importantly, the context and what the event tells us about the world we live in. But as a quick setup to our discussion, here are a few things you need to know before we dive in. And first, yes, it's geography, because it matters. Georgia sits right on the crossroads of Europe and Asia. It's sandwiched between Turkey and Russia. This statue, Mother Georgia, overlooks the capital Tbilisi, and it really symbolizes the country's centuries-long struggle against foreign invaders. For the past 200 years, that foreign invader has been Russia. First Tsarist, then Soviet Russia. For most Georgians, and that often doesn't quite come through in the coverage of the country, but for most Georgians, Russia is a colonizer. In the 80s and in the 90s, protests like these ones against Moscow played an absolutely crucial role in the collapse of the USSR. Today, 80% of Georgians want the country to be part of Europe. Every government since independence has kept Georgia on that pro-Western track. It is even written into the constitution. And this is why. These are images of the 2008 Russian invasion, which was very much the precursor to what's happening in Ukraine today. Georgia is part of Russia's war against its former satellite states. 20% of Georgia is occupied by Russia, and Russia continues to meddle. Cue in this man. This is one man you need to know. It's Bidzina Ivanishvili, the country's richest man. He's an oligarch who made all his money in Russia. His wealth, approximately $5 billion, is equivalent to about 1/5 of the country's GDP. He ran for office and won in 2012. His party, the Georgian Dream, initially promised to keep the country on its pro-Western course. They have now broken that promise. And that's the reason behind these kinds of protests that we're seeing in Tbilisi today. The kind of protests that are really crucial not just for the country, but for every community that's fighting autocracy around the world. The law on foreign agents, which we will talk about plenty today, may sound just like a piece of boring bureaucracy, but it is a lot more than that. And that's why thousands and thousands of people have been out in the streets for the past 4 weeks. The amazing thing about these protests is that they are completely grassroots and they're organized by Georgia's youth. One of the key organizers, Tamara Arveladze, is with us today. And Tatusha, it's you that I would like to start with. When we were speaking yesterday, you told me that this is absolutely existential. Can you just tell us why? Why existential?
Hello, everyone. It's a big pleasure to be with you all to talk about the situation that has never been more alarming, at least in my conscious experience. The threats are existential because Georgia's democracy is backsliding rapidly, and we're facing the catastrophe. The country's authoritarian drift is risking the future and the freedom of our country, as well as the liberty of each and every individual that are living here. The actions of Georgian Dream Party has nothing to do with the democratic future that majority of Georgians aim to build. The government is neglecting and disrespecting the constitution, as well as the civil rights and liberties of all of us that should be guaranteed by our constitution. We're collectively losing our right to Euro-Atlantic future, as well as our freedom of speech and the freedom of existence. The foreign agents law aims to silence Georgian people, Georgian majority, and to break up our road towards Western democracies. It resembles laws in Russia and other autocracies, so it diverts Georgia towards our enemy, Russia. The Russian law will exterminate all European standards and efforts and resources that help us to grow as a society, to grow and build as a strong society that will have the future of democratic development. We must not stay face to face with Russia, especially alone, without our Western partners that help us for decades to rebuild the nation and rebuild the strong democratic nation. Georgian Dream is ignoring the existence of the majority of the people, majority of Georgians, and nothing good happens when the government ignores the clear will of the majority. So the consequences as well as ramifications of the foreign agents law will be tragic for Georgians, and we all understand that. That's why we keep standing and we keep having the peaceful disobedience, like we're trying to do our best in order to make everyone hear our voice, that we are not going back to the Russian influence, and we want to build the strong democratic future for our country, which Georgia Dream is trying to make all kinds of obstacles to. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatusha. I have a zillion questions, but we'll come back to you. And can I bring you in just for us to zoom out a little bit, and if you can put it in just a wider context of what's happening with the world, in the world today, kind of the backlash against this authoritarian rise that we're seeing elsewhere.
So I think it's very important to understand that these kinds of laws, this so-called foreign agents law, is very different from laws in the United States and in the democratic world, which are also sometimes people who have foreign links are asked to identify themselves if they're doing political business or economic business in a given country. These are laws, there's a tradition of laws that goes back now to about 2012, which was the year that Russia first started to pass laws limiting the rights of NGOs and charities that have foreign funding and giving them the public label of foreign agents, which sounds in Russian like foreign spies. And there's a raft of other countries that have done it too. So it's not just Russia. I put together a list of, just a very quick list of countries that have done this in recent years. One is Ethiopia. A version of their law gives a sort of government board the right to abolish organizations if they're deemed prejudicial to peace, welfare, or good order, which basically means anything. Cambodia passed a law banning any organizations whose activities jeopardize peace, stability, and public order. Venezuela has passed a series of laws like this. Civic organizations in Cuba, I don't think, are allowed to exist at all. So essentially, what this law is
Egypt, Nicaragua,
Nicaragua, you could almost go down this Belarus. In Belarus, civic organizations that are designed to help people with disabilities have been threatened and harassed. So it's not even these aren't even necessarily political laws. And the point is that over the past decade, autocracies have come to understand that the power of civic organization threatens their kind of power. So of course it doesn't actually threaten the peace of the country. It doesn't threaten the prosperity of a given country. In fact, civic organization can help increase democracy. It can help increase public engagement. It's a very positive, it's considered to be a positive thing in any democracy. But of course, civic engagement can threaten autocrats who hold power in untransparent ways, who do so using kleptocratic and autocratic methods. A civil society is capable of exposing corrupt links. It's capable of having people question whether the autocrat has the right to rule indefinitely. And so a whole series of autocracies all over the world have created these new kinds of laws that are designed to clamp down on democracy and to prevent any kind of political change. And of course, the fact that it's happening in Georgia, which was a democracy and is now a declining or illiberal democracy, is especially threatening, because it's not just about the law, it's about the symbolism of what this law means. So you have...
And Anne, it feels like a good way to kind of ask you, a good place to ask you, how relevant, I know we've got loads of people joining from the United States. That's the majority of people tuning in at the moment. Tell me, with the election coming up in the States as well, are you seeing lessons of what you're seeing in Georgia for the US?
I mean, so Georgia is an example of a country where you had a democratically elected government that then proceeded to undermine the institutions of the state. And this is now how most democracies die. So we all have in our mind a kind of cliche image of what a coup d'etat looks like, and there are tanks in the street and gunshots and so on. Actually, most democracies don't die that way anymore. They mostly die because a ruling party takes over the judiciary, hampers the media, or, as in the case of Georgia, blocks civic organizations from forming themselves and begins to occupy all of the public space. There is a threat that a second Trump term could devolve in that direction. We see some state governments in the United States have made moves in that direction. What we're talking about is the creation of a one-party state, and the way to get there is precisely through legal and sometimes very technocratic sounding crackdowns like the one we're seeing in Georgia.
That's right. And I want to bring in Tornike Gordadze, who is a former minister in Georgia, was in charge of the European integration, now is in France as a political scientist. Tornike, what Anne was just talking about, and the question that I think all of us often get is, why is it is the elected Georgian parliament that is supporting this law that is infuriating so many people in the country. Can you just explain how we got there, like how this happened?
Hi, everyone. This is the question I'm asked all the time, because 80% of Georgia's population is pro-European. They have elected a parliament that is voting now the law, the Russian law. The elections in Georgia, as in many countries with imperfect democracy, have their own logic. For example, being in power gives the government party invaluable advantage through what we call administrative resource, or mobilization of state resources for electoral reasons. These resources include both coercion and rewards. And that's why quasi-automatically, something like 25% of the votes directly, automatically go to the ruling party in the countries like Georgia. That's why I don't share the analysis that the elections are really democratic in the countries like Georgia. The second factor that explains this is that Georgian Dream, the ruling party, in addition to the fact that the elections are maybe relatively free but not fair, is that this party, taking into account the fact that the overwhelming majority of the Georgian people are pro-European, has always concealed their pro-Russian sympathies, like the Yanukovych regime in Ukraine until 2013, 2014. So Georgian Dream consciously maintained this ambiguity. And even during the last elections in 2020 or 2021, their objective was to join the European Union. They never said that they were against the European Union. The fact is how many people are so angry and are in the streets. It's not only against this law and to protect freedom of speech and NGOs, but also they feel betrayed.
Peter, Tornike just mentioned Ukraine. You have spent so much time in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion of the country in 2022. Can you talk a little bit about and you and I have talked plenty about this being yet another front line. Can you talk about the importance of seeing the developments in Georgia as part of Russia's war on Ukraine?
Well, I think the dynamics are, they're multivectoral and tell us a lot about this kind of emerging, I don't even know what to call it, kind of networked Cold War that's we're still struggling to really define. But there's lots of things playing out. I mean, as Russia looks stronger and stronger on the front in Ukraine, on the war front in Ukraine, as Western support looks unstable to Ukraine, that most likely emboldens the sort of like the hidden pro-Russian face of these regimes that Tornike was talking about. It emboldens them to take more aggressive steps because they can see that, Putin and his agenda, which is not just to conquer Ukraine, but to ensure there's less democracies in the world, and especially in this region, is getting stronger. The West looks weak and the democratic cause looks weak. But then on the other side as well, I think that, the struggle of Georgians for their freedom, which is, and their democracy, which is simultaneously, as Tamara so clearly articulated, a struggle against Russian imperialism, also, if it's successful, makes the Kremlin look less competent, less in control, and emboldens, if not the soldiers on the front, but emboldens a change in calculation among Russian elites who are suddenly on the back foot.
That's your empires crumble from the edges.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they crumble from lots of spaces, but they often crumble from the fringes, which emboldens the center to reorganize itself, which could include military decisions as well. But I would look even further. I think I live in Washington, D.C., which is a city that loves to see, especially the current administration, all the problems in discrete little boxes. Here is the Gaza problem, and here is the China problem, and here is the Ukraine problem, and here is something happening in the Caucasus, which we annoyingly have to deal with. And really, of course, from Moscow, these things are always very connected. And I do think we need to start understanding in a nuanced and way that's sort of contemporary. Yeah? We can't just roll out Cold War cliches about what's happening in Georgia, Russia's campaigns in Africa, what's happening in Ukraine, all connect up into a larger map.
And I don't think anyone is better capable of connecting the dots on this and this conversation than Egor Kuroptev, who came to Georgia because his organization in Russia was declared a foreign agent. And Egor, you are now facing basically the same law being imposed on your organization now registered in Georgia, right? Can you just talk a little bit about what it actually feels like to, when that space, it feels to so many that the space where people like journalists or civil society activists are able to operate freely, you're experiencing very much firsthand.
No, our organization is marked, hello and thanks for invitation. Our organization is marked as undesirable in Russia, not foreign agent. My wife's organization is a foreign agent, and my wife herself is a foreign agent as an individual. And now both of us will face the same situation in Georgia, which is quite surprising. This law in Russia, it was implemented, as Anne mentioned, in 2012 to remind, after huge protests in Russia against President Putin coming back to power again as a president. And since then, it has undergone, I don't know, hundreds of amendments. And till now, foreign agents in Russia cannot, for example, join some election rally, cannot nominate himself for some elections, cannot do anything, honestly speaking, including, for example, teaching lessons as a lecturer and making any kind of public events. So it was the beginning of the end, I would say. And most likely, if it happens in Georgia, it's the beginning of the end for Georgian civil society. I mean, like in terms of repressions as well. And maybe one more thing to continue what was said already. Both in Russia and for Russians, for us, both for Georgians, both, I'm very sorry, for Armenians, Kazakh, and etc. The situation at the moment is that the Kremlin is trying to push the maximum pressure in all countries around. And it is a question of whether we will be able to somehow oppose it or not. And this foreign agent law in Georgia is the same thing. It's a huge campaign initiated by the Kremlin and implemented by the Kremlin in all bordering countries. So for us, I don't know what we will do, because Georgia still hosts the biggest number of Russian political exiles who are actually pushed out of the country because of foreign agent law, extremist, undesirable. But the first one was actually foreign agent. And now we're like facing the situation when maybe we have to leave another country.
Yeah, so there's not clear where to go, as many people have been telling me. I want to go back to the question. We've got loads of questions. Sorry, slightly distracted because we've got lots of questions coming in, and I do want to make sure we answer as many of them as we can. So actually, Tornike, let me throw this to you. One of the questions that we're being asked is whether the European Union would be able to simply speed up the accession into the EU. Is that at all on the cards? That's being asked. Could you address that, please?
The European Union gave the candidate status to Georgia in December 2023, and this candidate status was given to Georgia not because Georgian government was doing well, but it was a geopolitical decision, mainly thanks to the heroic resistance of Ukrainian people to the Russian invasion, and to the understanding from the European Union side that geopolitically this region was extremely important. So what Georgian government did is just the opposite. So they are destroying this opportunity that the European Union gave to Georgia by sabotaging this decision and not fulfilling the 9 conditions that the European Union presented to Georgia for starting negotiations about accession, but introducing this law. And Georgian government was told before that these kind of laws were in total contradiction with the EU integration process. So they made this decision knowing exactly that it would stop, it would freeze Georgia's accession to European Union. So I don't think now European Union will foster or will do something to accelerate Georgia's integration. On the contrary, they will show that these kind of decisions stop Georgia's integration. They will be even backsliding. I don't know. I've heard already that there's some discussions about temporarily maybe suspending visa-free regime with the European Union as a gesture to show that Georgian government is not doing well. And also there are discussions about targeted sanctions, personal sanctions. But the sanctions issue in the European Union are more complicated to adopt, because you need a unanimous decision of 27 member states. And as we know, there are at least 1 or 2 Hungary's, the Orban's Hungary and now Fico's Slovakia, that will not accept sanctions against Georgian government members or the leaders of those who are involved in repression, because we heard and we saw lots of violence coming from the government and from law enforcement bodies. So there'll be discussions about visa-free. There'll be now that the president put her veto, it gives roughly maybe a week or 10 days more to increase pressure on Georgian government, and we'll see what will happen.
Yes, and just to let those know who are not up to speed, basically the Georgian president has now vetoed the law, which is great on paper, but in reality, the parliament can and is expected to override it. So, Tatusha, that means that really most of the hope is on the protests and the protesters. Do you feel that you guys are able to keep mobilizing people, to keep getting people out into the streets?
I think for the first time that I'm experiencing this protests do not really have the one power, like centralized or organization. Like it's very everyone is feeling their need to go there and like do their best, like engage in planning and organizing and distributing information, or like everyone is trying to do their best as they can. And it's for the first time I'm feeling that the wave of people's anger and wave of people's will to fight against this injustice that we're facing right now is unstoppable. Like I've never had that feeling before. Like even though like we've experienced 2019 events when the Duma member was welcomed against the constitution in our parliament, and it was shocking for Georgians. It was the first sign where Georgian Dream decided to go hand in hand with Russia against their own people. That's when they very unproportionately raided the protests. That was the first spark. Afterwards, that there was Ukraine, when Russia entered Ukraine and the war started, where we saw that Georgian Dream is doing everything in support of Russia against Ukraine. So currently, I think we're not, nobody is buying their lies, nobody is buying, majority of the people do not really buy the propaganda that Georgian Dream is trying to capture. So
to spread. Yeah, and we'll go back. We actually did try very hard to get a Georgian Dream representative on this call, and we failed. They wouldn't come on. But we do have a clip to play you a little bit later. But Tatusha, when you say unstoppable now, it makes me thinking, wow, these people are unstoppable. A few years ago, when I was watching protests in Belarus, where hundreds of thousands of people were relentlessly coming out into the streets. With us today is Hanna Liubakova, who is now no longer, like most journalists and Belarusian opposition activists, those who are not in jail. She's now outside of the country. Hanna, watching Georgia for you now, what is it like?
Well, there are many similarities, but of course there are many difficulties. Georgia is undoubtedly a more democratic state than Belarus is. What legislative measures Georgia is now facing, we've had, unfortunately, for several decades already. As early as in 2001, Belarus has actually restricted, introduced this sort of authorization of foreign funding. And then, of course, it got worse and worse and worse. But apart from this legislative initiatives, what's even more important, that the regime not only it just does not affect, not only affect civil society organizations' ability to receive foreign funding, but what's more, it's actually the regime coming to these organizations, raiding offices, closing bank accounts, and arresting leaders, of course. Since 2020, we've faced these mass repressions, unprecedented repressions against civil society. And earlier, Anne mentioned the organization that helped people with disabilities that got dissolved. But we literally have bird watchers as extremist organization in Belarus. So perhaps it's the only country that announces bird watchers as extremist. And Ales Bialiatski, our Nobel Prize laureate, was actually arrested and charged with smuggling of cash, which is, of course, a nonsense charge imposed on him. So you see the trajectory, you see where it can go, and this is something I would like you to warn against.
Yeah, and just to one of the most striking, to build on that, one of the most striking things about the protests has been that even before the law was officially passed, we saw an absolutely dramatic police. Georgian police were always seen as this like reformed, on law-abiding, incredibly friendly force. And suddenly we started seeing images that were a lot more reminiscent of Russia or Belarus. And we'll play you some of that if our producer could line up that video that we have. And as you watch the video, like there are several tactics that you can pay attention to. As people, you'll see the police actually targeting, zooming in on very specific protesters. grabbing them out of the crowd and beating them up. They're also constantly, you will see this, taking pictures and trying to identify specific people in the crowd. And also chasing people down the street. So not just stopping by chasing people out. And in addition of that, we've seen, you know, police raid and arrest opposition activists and bloggers. People are being summoned to the police stations. So, and it is a very, I just want to underline that this is a very, very dramatic change from a country that, despite a lot of chaos, despite a lot of instability over the years, has always, at least for the past decade and a half, has had a police force that was always very kind of law-abiding and public friendly. There's a policeman taking photos, taking more pictures. And it's not just journalists, it's not just opposition. With us today is Gia Japaridze. Gia is an academic, he's a former diplomat. Gia, you were in bed yesterday still with a brain concussion when we spoke. I'm glad to see you sitting up today. We will show some of the, I think we've got photos of the injuries that you suffered. Can you just like very briefly tell us about the experience and what was being said to you as the police got you?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this webinar. I will try to cut the long story short. I was beaten up in front of my house. I was coming back from the Polish reception. It was an ambushed attack. I parked my car in front of my house. I crossed the driveway heading to the entrance, and I felt blows from both sides from behind. Unknown people started beating me with sticks like baseball bats. While beating me, at some moment I fell down, and while beating me, one of them mentioned the law. I don't remember exactly the sentence, but one of them said, so you are against the law, or why you are against the law. So the law was mentioned. So I
while they were beating you, they were actually telling you that they're beating you because of the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow,
yeah.
that's
so
incredible.
I have.
Yeah, and we've seen sort of similar intimidation tactics against journalists as well. Mariam, you were here with us. Mariam Nikuradze, fantastic Georgian journalist. Please follow her on Twitter. Her tweeting from the events has been really extraordinary, and OC Media that she works for has done some really, really impressive stuff. Mariam, can you tell us, and then Nino, if you can chime in as well, about like what it's like to be working as a journalist in the environment.
Yeah, sure. Hello. So quickly, I want to say that a journalist, I think, felt the backslide of democracy in this country firsthand since 2021. And since then, everything has been just going down. Just a reminder, it was when more than 50 journalists were beaten up in one day, and the perpetrators were never punished. These days, just as you've seen the footage, my personal impression is, and I've covered every major event since 2008 in this country, 9, is that the police has given absolute liberty to do anything they desire, basically, when they are at these protests and when they are dispersing, so to say. So last year, of course, I was there when they first introduced foreign agents draft law, and last year police also used massive amount of force, but I don't remember them being so brutal to individual protesters, just grabbing them while arresting 15 people, beating up one person. This is insane. And second of all, completely neglecting the fact that there are journalists and that the journalists are, doing their job. Not only neglecting, but they are getting triggered when they see us that we are kind of documenting all these violations. And you've seen in these videos you just played, one of them was actually mine, and I was filming this guy who was lying on the ground, and I don't know, 10 people are beating him up. I was trying to film, and the riot police officers just pushed me, and they forced me out, and they tried to take away my camera. And this is not a rare thing anymore. It's very normal to just attack journalists. There have been several injured journalists, and not only that, we have concerns of security, we have concerns of obviously legislative one, and of course massive hate campaign against us coming from the government. It's encouraged from the government. So it's like we have to fight on many different
and the hate campaign has been to the point of I mean, again, if we could play that video, many in addition to police, plainclothes police, or whoever they are, titushki as they're called, have been putting up posters that are saying sort of enemy of the state, foreign agent, outside of the houses of journalists, civil rights activists, and various people. And here is it's a security camera that's capturing this the posters being put up in the entry hallway of one of the people. I want to, it's impossible to talk about any of this. And actually, Nino, let me bring you in quickly, and then we will move on to some of the questions, because so many are coming in.
Yeah, Natalia, what is important, that it is very problematic to investigate crimes during the rallies and before, because these special forces, they are completely dressed in black. Their faces are covered, they have no identification marks, and even more, the law does not require them to do so. So it is impossible to investigate all this violence we all see on the during the rallies, or before. You mentioned that very famous and influential Georgian journalists already became targets of an attack. Anonymous assaulting calls are being made to them and their family members, including children. And as you show, on the walls of their homes and offices were written this and insulting messages. And I wanted to briefly discuss the two main threats we already faced at this stage. First, to get this reputation damaging foreign agent label, which is not only unjustified or prejudicial, but it's strongly stigmatizing effect, has this strongly stigmatizing effect on civil society's acts. And the second threat, the government has the right to access financial records and documents of any media organization, and a government can ask for information not only about the organization, but also about ask for the personal data of employees and sources, I mean journalists and sources. And if we say that this law is identical by its spirit to the Russian foreign agent law, we can already know that we will see all the dangers that journalists in Russia have gone through. And if you think that the foreign agent label is the final stage, you will be the wrong. Like the recently Russian Justice Ministry included RFERL on its register of undesirable organization, and it means that RFERL is a now threat to the country's nation security.
And of course, RFERL had to pull its offices from Russia, from Belarus, and now you are facing the same
Russian
thing in Georgia. That's right.
Here.
And refugees, your Russian journalists are refugees in Georgia. Once again, a reminder of that rapidly shrinking space for free public discourse. Let's talk a little bit about what the government is doing and some of the things that they are saying. Unfortunately, once again, we tried to get them in to come on to speak to us during this discussion. They wouldn't. But I want to play a very quick clip by Bidzina Ivanishvili, the chair of the founder of the ruling party, speaking to a crowd. And I have to underline that he has, his transformation, Georgia's transformation over the past, really since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, has been incredibly rapid. And he has now gone pretty much full conspiracy theory and very, openly anti-US and anti-Western. So if we can quickly play that clip, that would be great.
არამედ გარედან დანიშნული რევოლუციური კომიტეტი. უცხოური აგენტურა მართავდა. საქართველოს ხელისუფლების ლიდერებად NGO-ების ხელით მოწყობილი რევოლუციის შემდეგ დაინიშნა.
The video, there is a translation of the clip in the chat if you couldn't quite catch the subtitles. But the Ivanishvili is referring to the color revolutions that has been sort of the favorite, the scapegoat of to the Rose Revolution, to the Maidan Revolution, and basically saying that this Foreign Agents Act is designed to protect Georgia from another uprising. I'm very pleased that with us today is Slobodan Djinovic, who we could say is, Slobodan, you're kind of the original foreign agent. You were in the Otpor movement in Serbia that ousted Slobodan Milosevic, and then Slobodan, not Milosevic, but Djinovic has been working with activists across the world, really, from Lebanon to Tbilisi, Ukraine, working with them on tactics of peaceful resistance. Give us your assessment of what's happening here, and would love for you to address what Bidzina Ivanishvili is saying about all of this really being a CIA plot.
Yes, hi Natalia. Well, happy to be with you guys today, and I mean, thank you for this intro and attribute like original foreign agent. I think, look. Any aspiring populist or autocrat is having the same narrative, and I'm totally amazed how it sounds. I mean, it's coming probably from the same kitchen, obviously, because the narrative is the same, the messages are the same. The only the audience is different, because the audiences are the people they're actually trying to mobilize for their cause. Now, the funny thing on that note is that all of these autocrats of this age, if we just look at the countries where we have the slide in terms of democratic values and democratic procedures, are actually the products of some velvet revolutions. I mean, we had revolution, we had democracy, we had actually the problem with transition that was not successful enough to build strong enough institutions to resist these populist attempts and the people like these to come and gain the power, simply because the people who originally were the leaders and advocates of democracy made some mistakes, and normally and originally, the real outcome and the real heritage of the nonviolent changes are free and fair elections. And so these guys won because of that, because the societies matured in both Georgia and some other countries, and respectively, I mean, these people won at some point. Now, all these narratives about the foreign agent laws are just attempts to prevent any further transition to happen, and I think it's a fear. It's a fear at the same time, and it is also the attempt to lock up the situations as they are without any possibility for society to move on into freeing itself from the locks and the chains where the media, where the institutions, where the judiciary is. So that's basically all the same. I've been hearing these stories all over the place, and many people that we worked with, they always start like, but our situation is different. No, it's not different. It's pretty much alike. It's the same. So what Peter said, just seeing it as a separate boxes and just looking at it isolated, no, it's not really the right way to approach it. It is very, very similar.
Thanks for that. Let's go to some of the audience questions, and I'll let you, I'll sort of let you pick whoever wants to address this one. Let's start with this. Bidzina Ivanishvili made his money in Russia and has deep ties there. Has he been Moscow's man in place all along, thereby affirming that the Kremlin has pursued a long-term strategy to bring Georgia, and by extension other former Soviet republics, back into the orbit? Tornike, I imagine you're a good person to pick that one up. Maybe Gia would like to add something as well, or maybe Gia, you want to start.
Should I start?
Tornike.
Go ahead.
Okay, Tornike.
Yeah, I read some of the questions about here Ivanishvili and people saying that he became anti-European and pro-Russian back in 2020 or 2021. For me, he was pro-Russian from the very beginning. As a person, Bidzina Ivanishvili, he spent most of his life in Russia. His mentality is Russian. He believes in all Russian conspiracy theories. Even starting in 2012, he shared already all these conspiracy visions of the West, of some minorities governing the world. His first two statements about foreign policy were the following. First, Armenia was a good example for Georgia, how to manage relations between the West and Russia back in 2012. And the second statement was about Georgia to disappear as a problem between the West and Russia. That was his ambition from the very beginning. In 2015, the Prime Minister of Georgia at this time, Japaridze, openly in BBC interview said that Georgia had different problems with Russia than Ukraine, and these problems were different. Then Georgia was having a constructive dialogue with Russia, while Ukraine was still in conflict with Russia, etc. So these premises were already there. And I don't believe at all that Ivanishvili became pro-Russian now or a few years ago. So tactically speaking, he needed to maintain this ambiguity because, again, Georgian population is pro-Western, and he also the international community, he wanted to manage to be legitimate as the head of Georgia in 2012. So he surrounded himself with also several small pro-Western parties, and then this was a coalition at the beginning, and then gradually these small pro-European, pro-Western parties were excluded from this coalition. At the end, we have Ivanishvili and the people who are personally loyal to him. All the ministers, all the deputies, MPs from the parliament have personal links and personal loyalty to Mr. Bidzina Ivanishvili.
Gia, do you agree?
Yeah, of course I agree. I more than agree with Tornike. I did not have any doubt since 2011 that Ivanishvili represents Russian interests in Georgia. Slowly he started putting Georgia back to Russian orbit. You see that in the vocabulary of Georgian Dream, there is no word NATO. And what we are going through now is just a constitutional coup, and Ivanishvili will try to bring Georgia back to Russian influence. I have never had any doubt about Ivanishvili.
We've got just over 10 minutes left, and the next question is for Tamara. And the question is, does anyone on our side have any idea what should we do after they finally adopt the law overruling presidential veto? And also, what is the course of action should be after the elections when GD will announce they got 70% of the votes, quote marks, winning triumphantly?
I personally believe that it's essential for all of the GD parliament members who voted for the Russian influence law to be sanctioned. First of all, I think it will really help the civil society in Georgia and everyone who are protesting to have the declared picture that the West is doing all they can in order to avoid this law from passing and avoid Georgia to stick with Russian orbit in future. And I feel like we have upcoming 5 months until elections, even though it's very hard to be hopeful with elections in the hands of Georgian Dream, because we know that they will use every possibility in order to manipulate and influence the elections. Elections is part of our democratic future, and we as a society as a whole, facing the existential threat, should do everything in order to get out and vote there should be like as many people as possible voting for the elections in upcoming October. And before the elections, I think the peaceful protest and the resistance will continue, and it's not going anywhere, because as we usually say during the protests, the river of the people running from the heart of the country won't stop, and the anger will only get bigger. And we're not trusting in Georgian Dream that they will do anything better for the country. So for this upcoming 5 months, we should do our best to make everyone believe again, like have faith in elections, because I think that we should do everything in order to make them leave the majority of the rule via elections. And we, as a Shame movement and individuals and everyone who I'm talking to, we're all like planning to individually and collectively work for the entire 5 months to delegitimize the Georgian Dream's power, and to make all our citizens, our peers, understand the essential importance of these elections. These elections will be the most important elections in my experience. So we will do everything.
And of course, many people listening to us now have another election on their minds. And a poignant message here from Maria, who says, from the USA perspective, this is our future if democracy defense fails. How do we convince our fellow citizens that A, our democracy is just as fragile, and B, once it is gone, it will be very hard, if not impossible, to respond? It's an easy one, so I'm going to give it to Anne. Anne, could you address that? Or Peter, one of you. So the question from Maria in the US, how do we convince our fellow citizens that our democracy is just as fragile, and once it's gone, it will be very hard, if not impossible, to respond?
I mean, there are a lot of people working on this problem, but I mean, I think the best way to remind Americans what's at stake in this next election is to really talk to them about the ways in which democracy is already breaking down in some ways in the United States. We have an untransparent system of funding politics, which is very similar to the autocratic world. We've had at the state level, we have the rise of almost one-party states. In the next few months, that's what I'm going to be writing about and working on. But of course, showing people pictures from Georgia and saying, look, this is a democratically elected government. People voted for it, and then it went in a completely different direction from what 80% of the country wants, is also a pretty good lesson.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, and flipping it on its head, I mean, what are the positive lessons that we can learn from pro-democratic movements in Poland, in Georgia, in Brazil recently? I think what's very striking about these movements, as our Georgian friends were telling us, is that they're not dependent on political leaders. I mean, America, we're in a moment where even the leader of the Democratic Party isn't inspiring a lot of people. But it's clear here that what is being fought for is not a leader, a party, which a lot of people may feel alienated from in Georgia as well, you tell me, but democratic institutions and rights, which immediately affect people in their everyday life. I mean, I think that's the really important connection to make. So in that sense, I think this movement in Georgia is a positive lesson as well.
Egor, I want to come to you as a Russian citizen, no longer able to be in Russia, now threatened in Georgia. What is your advice to the Americans voting this year?
My advice for Americans and actually everyone in the West to look at this, like who benefits in terms of Georgia, who benefits. Georgian government was about to win election in October 2024, months ago, and now they have lots of problems because of this foreign agent law. So who benefits? Russia benefits, the Kremlin, and the suggestion will be to have Georgian people will decide and choose what to do domestically, but the West should decide what to do in terms of democracy and the victory, and it means to win in Ukraine. If we don't win in Ukraine, it means countries like Georgia, Armenia, and others will still be held hostages by the Kremlin, and people from these countries will be fighting and fighting again and again, like unstoppable process. So the thing that we all have to do, must do, is to win in Ukraine. And in this case, the democracy will win.
Thank you. And I just want to go around as we're almost out of time. And there are many questions we haven't managed to answer, but I promise you we'll try to get to them and email you the answers after the event if we didn't get to your question. But can we just go around our virtual room and give me one sentence, 30 seconds, on why you think the world should care about the events that are happening in Georgia? And Nino, you've got your hand up, so I'm going to start with you, even though you might want to be talking about something else.
I just wanted.
You got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the question about the Global War Party, how it is confusing, and how does this narrative change the analysis of the recent political situation. So even answering this question might be very important. The whole society, the whole society, to analyze the modern challenges of modern democracy, the structure and the portrait, how it might be looked. Even for this is very important, because it's the last narrative from which comes from the government. Yeah,
and Nino is referring here to a conspiracy theory that it's a global war party that is behind the events in Georgia, the events in Ukraine, and conflicts elsewhere. And this is something that is being spread by the Georgian government. So let's go around quickly. You got 30 seconds. Why should the world care about the events unfolding in Georgia? Peter.
Well, listen, I live in America, and therefore, because I live in America, the world equals America, which is, what most people think here. But listen, you saw Ivanishvili talking about color revolutions, which Slobo, I guess, started. It's an old Russian propaganda line, which is a real sign of kind of like crushing of democratic aspirations. And the shocking thing is, I live in America now. It is now rolled out here all the time. It's used here all the time by a certain part of the right nationalist, very powerful propaganda machine that shockingly accuses various protests in America to be part of color revolution. So like, it's one thing. We're already living in one weird struggle, and it's already there.
And why should the world care? And then Tamara and Mariam, please.
Look, autocrats borrow tactics from one another. They watch one another. They don't conspire in one secret room. That's not how their network works. But they do pay attention when tactics work in other places. So if Ivanishvili wins in Georgia, despite having 80% of the population against him, you can guarantee that others will try the same.
Thank you. Tamara?
I agree with Anne. I can't agree more. It's like all about domino theory, I think. If we lose, it won't stop here. Russia won't stop in Georgia, and it will try its best to expand its scope of influence. And also, I think I can be biased. I think Georgian people really deserve to have European strong democracy and like better future, bright future that we fight for. And yeah, I think we're part of civilized world. And I think that even though government really forces us to be otherwise, we should win. Like it should happen like that, because like, yeah, light should win over the darkness.
I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it here on this note. Thank you so much, Tamara, Gia, Mariam, Hanna, Slobodan, Peter, and Tornike, Nino. Thank you, Egor. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. I know there's a lot that we didn't manage to get to, but Coda's tagline is stay on the story. And we promise that we will stay on the story of what's happening in Georgia and how it spreads and affects places elsewhere. Thank you so much for joining us. Until the next time.